Good evening, everyone. Hello, good evening. My name is Brian Prescott. I'm going to be doing some introductions for you all this evening. I want to start off by saying thank you to the Hopkinton Historical Society, and I would like to call up in a moment the incoming president of the Hopkinton Historical Society, Dr. Ann Mattina, as the Hopkinton Historical Society has been the sponsor for all of these talks on the history of Hopkinton and how we got here. Who better to hear from than our new incoming president, Dr. Ann Mattina. So a round of applause, thank you.
Okay, now I have to talk more softly. I'm Ann Mattina, incoming president, past president as well, current vice president. So I've been involved with the society since 2015 when I worked with them on the 300th anniversary celebration and the historic house and garden tour that we put together, which was a fabulous success. Hopefully we'll do another one of those again soon. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes tonight to, first of all, recognize and thank Chuck for all his hard work on this material, and also Aubrey and John Ritz and Linda Connolly. This has been a labor of love with these records from the town hall, and special thanks to Connor for letting us go in and scan the documents from the original meeting notes. I hope I'm not giving anything away. Okay. Anyway, but I also am here to drum up business, a little bit of business for the Historical Society. We really need members, and we really need more volunteers. We have so much material. Well, Linda and I just keep pulling boxes, and John Palmer, our current president, we just keep pulling boxes out of places with incredible stories in them. Today, I got stuck in this is what happens. I got stuck in a story about a cattle drive that used to come down through the center of town. They would take cattle from the western part of the state and bring it through the center of town into the stockyards in Brighton. And it was a day off from school for the kids, and it was really a big celebration and a lot of fun. Who knew? I had no idea. Anyway, you really can get lost in those records, but we have a little bit of everything. We have official school records, certainly tons of school photos, any kind of genealogy help that you might need, we can help you with that. The history of your house, anything pertaining to that. And then also we like to help out with organizations. This year's the 50th anniversary of the first Poly Arts. So they're putting a little something together to commemorate 50 years of Poly Art. So we love to help out other organizations, and we look forward to working with you. Some of you, I got you when you were coming in with the membership forms. This is for new members only. If you're a current member, you'll get your renewals this week. I put them in the mail today, but it comes with a discount for attendance for tonight, a new membership, $10 off of a family membership. And I have self-addressed stamped envelopes, which I'm happy to pass out. If you want to take this home and fill it out and send it in to me, that would be great. I'll give you a self-addressed stamped envelope, so you don't even have to worry about that. If you want, you can Venmo me. I promise I'll give it to the Historical Society. I've got my Venmo on here as well, if that's easier for you. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to this talk tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mattina, and thank you to the Hopkinton Historical Society. So I want to give an introduction tonight for our speaker, our keynote speaker of the lecture series, Chuck Joseph, and he asked me to give an introduction in lieu of Tim Kilduff, so I apologize that I am not Tim. I'm not going to try to be Tim. I just want to talk to you kind of about my relationship with Chuck, why he has been such an influential figure in my life, and why I think this particular talk of the series is going to be so important. So many of you may not know me, but I grew up here in town as part of the Prescott and Hayward families. And then in high school, I became very good friends with his two sons, Kyle and Daniel. Influential members of my life, Chuck and his two sons, lifelong friends. During those years of high school, Chuck became one of the most important figures and role models in my life. He would guide and lead many dinner conversations, discussions, arguments with our friends, Drew Clark, Dan Clifford, myself, and many others. Chuck would share insights with us on the books that he was reading at the time, texts that he had read as an undergrad in history at Brown University. Beyond telling us about specific facts or specific details of politics or his opinions on the facts and details, he created an environment during those conversations that would challenge our perspectives and our views on humanity and the world. The idea that good people can disagree and conversations don't need to have a conclusive end or a definitive right answer was really important to me as a teenager. Though I didn't fully understand it at the time, Chuck's household shaped the way that I currently view the world and myself in that world. I am now a history teacher right across the parking lot at Hopkinton High School. When I was asked to give the opening address to tonight's lecture on this particular topic, I thought of the similarities with my own experience. You will be hearing about 18th century Hopkinton at a crucial point in world history. While listening to Chuck speak about the early residents of a newly incorporated Hopkinton, incorporated right on the eve of revolution and global conflict, I want you to try to place yourself in the world of those residents. Put yourself in their life. Consider the regular folks who had to get up each morning and attend to their daily lives, as we all do. They had to harvest crops, they had to build roofs, they had to buy shoes, they had to argue over parcels of land, they had to feed their kids, they had to care for a sick relative, they had to grumble about all the new taxes that were coming down from across the pond, and all other manner of mundane daily activities that went on for 300 years from then until now. These were regular people with regular lives doing regular things, as we all do. If we all lived in 1770, it would have been perfectly reasonable for any one of us to say, I don't know if I feel super confident about independence. I kind of like the way things are. That would have been a perfectly reasonable thing for any one of us to say. Most of us have really important daily things to worry about. You have a family member, you have a kid, where's my food coming? That's what's important to me right now. Independence, these high-minded Enlightenment ideals, that's not important for us. And yet, your neighbor right across the street would have been equally justified in saying, but we can make a better life. We can have a better society if we join a union of self-governed citizens. And both of those people would have had to be in the same town and get up for work the next day and exist in the same community. The townsfolk of Hopkinton needed the ability to share their ideas, have their own opinions challenged, and then go on with their daily life next to people who disagreed with them. What Chuck provided for me as a teenager through my adult life was a space of fierce debate and unwavering respect. It's the exact same thing that allowed the people of this town to eventually declare independence. I think Chuck's talk tonight is so incredibly valuable for us in this moment in time. We get to see and hear the hard discussions that led to historic change. His talk should serve as a reminder to all of us that face-to-face conversations with people that we ardently disagree with is vital to a healthy society. Those who want bold change cannot do so alone. And those who might be a little bit more reluctant to change should never be afraid of hearing a different opinion. I think it goes without saying that this town and this country, we can certainly benefit from fruitful conversations with a variety of opinions. And I can think of no one better to facilitate such a conversation tonight than maybe the best teacher in this town, Chuck Joseph.
That was awesome, man. Thanks. Appreciate it. Oh, am I on? Am I on now? Can you guys hear? Okay, good. I don't stand behind, so I just had knee surgery, so I'm going to be bouncing around here. It'll be okay, but I'll be a little slower than normal. Good student, huh? Oof, man, that's a good student, I'll tell you. Okay, let's get started. We got a lot of work to cover through here, so I'm going to talk fast, probably too fast. I'm going to cover things that you want me to stop at. I'm not stopping, all right? But at the end, we'll have a Q&A, so if you think about something and you're my age, put it in your phone so you'll remember it by the end of the talk so you can ask the question, okay? All right, the title of this was in their own words. So we're going to talk about how we got to that, if we can start with that. Okay, Ob, let's move. All right, with appreciation, these are the people. Ann Mattina, you met before. That's the little scanning machine that the Historical Society has, and she was great. We went to the town hall. Let's bring everybody in, okay? So Linda Connolly, Ann Mattina, and Julie Doyle, who also got roped into it by being married to Aubrey for no other reason than that, all right? But she got roped in, and they all scanned all these documents, every town meeting note from 1723 to 1775. Scanned them all in. So now we have digitized notes, all right? The reason we scanned them in, let's go to the next one up. If you look on the right-hand side, that's the first page of the note. I'm telling you, even if that were legible to you and you had good eyesight, you couldn't decipher it. It's really hard to read. So we found a couple of AI programs that translate script and digitize it into print. So I didn't do a damn thing, but they scanned everything, and we got all these beautiful script on one side, type on the other side. But as you know, AI is far from perfect, especially when you're dealing with proper nouns, names, et cetera, et cetera. So John and Aubrey, God bless them, read every line of every town meeting note, and then they would go back and correct the AI, and once you correct the AI, it learns it and keeps going. So they were able to make some really good progress. All right, and we really got through. So when we say it's in their own words, on the left you see one of the bound volumes. And I just want to mention one thing. It is very rare for a town to have all of its town meeting notes from 1723, whatever it was, until 1775. Twice our town hall burnt down in the 1880s, 1860s, 1880s, and these survived. Now, there's a whole other lecture on why they survived, all right? But they survived. And so we were able, when we have these, and our series is being developed on continuing forward and continuing to go back to these notes to say, what were these people talking about at that time in our town? They are your geographical ancestors. The first people who lived in Hopkinton, the tribe of Magunko, Nipmuc Indians who lived on the hill called Magunko, which was in the center of town. So when you walk on the center of town, you walk through the common, you're walking on the same land. You're right there where they were. And there's something to be said for that. Go ahead, Ab. So when we did this lecture series, we really are talking about big history. And big history, and I was a history teacher, I hate dates and, who was the general in this war and did this. And okay, fine. We got to learn all that stuff. But in the end, who cares? What's the difference? And that's what we're really talking about. Is can you get a big picture of the sweep of this history in this little tiny New England community that Boston used to refer to as the wilderness? Could you get a sweep of this history? And then how does it now affect you moving forward? That's the value of history. It's how does it change the way you think? So it's a unified, I'll tell you an interesting story. 1975, I was young in 1975, and I was a new teacher here, and they said, Chuck, you need to teach a class on the history of Hopkinton. I said, okay, young guy, you do what they tell you. And I said, where's the curriculum? They said, no, there's no curriculum. You figure it out. So I went to Aubrey's dad, who was teaching with me at the time, and some other people, and I said, what do I do? And looking back on it, I didn't realize what was going on at the time. Looking back on it, they said, oh, go talk to this guy. No, go talk to this guy. Go talk to that woman. They were referring me to the elders of the town. They were saying, go to these people and get the oral history from them. And the more you realize that that is the way that history has been passed down, especially in the indigenous people in this country before the Europeans got here, that's how history was passed down, orally, from the elders on down. So they gave me a hodgepodge of baloney that I was trying to make I couldn't. And then I go down to the library, I meet Linda Collins. Anyway, it's a long story. So I end up putting together, actually the first time I did a history lecture was when we were raising money to build this building. I don't know if you remember, but we did 3 telethons out of the HCAM studios. Like Channel 2 had telethons. We were freaking nuts. We had 30 phones lined up with phone banks. We're calling out, we're raising money. This building is because of things like that. And that's a little piece of history that goes along with this. Go ahead. The most important thing for me as a teacher is that every single person in here, every face I look at, everybody has their own narrative. It is shaped by how you grew up, your parents, where you lived, what you experienced, and who taught you what at a certain age. But your narrative is not stagnant. What you believe now, you did not believe 5 years ago. You did most of it, but it changes. It gets tweaked. And the whole point is, if you walk out of here tonight and you say, my narrative's a little bit different, good. That's what we were trying to do. All right, just give you a little bit something so that your narrative about how you think about things gets altered a little bit. Go ahead. So I'm sorry, could you go back for a sec? Up on the left-hand side is a terrible picture that Aubrey took of the house where the first town meeting occurred. It's on East Main Street in 1724. The first town meeting occurred in that building, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And then, of course, we have the town common, which is really, it's a gem in New England. It's a real gem. All right, let's keep going. So the challenge is this. As you think about history, you have to think, who's telling the story? You know the old adage, history is told by the victors. So you don't get to find out what the losers thought about things. Well, most of our history is taught by Protestant white men, because they were running the show back then. But there's a lot that can be added to that as we move on. Go ahead. The biggest thing, the complaint that I have is when I think about how I was taught history back in the 60s, was when you teach history, it gets simplified in retrospect. It's like you're getting the note cards. You're not getting the whole story. And then it gets kind of sanitized. And it's like index cards. You know, you're just, okay, American Revolution, okay, Civil War, okay. But we don't get down to what really was happening. And that's what we're going to try to do here. We always have to ask ourselves, and this is something I hope you take with you for the rest of your life, is that whatever you are doing, are you being a good ancestor? Are you being a good ancestor to those who come behind you? Because I think a lot of the people that we talk about here tonight, the words that we read of them, they were being good ancestors. They were. They were great. They were limited, but they were great. So the other thing is you have to suspend what you know. The problem is you guys already know what happened. So because you know what happened, you're going to look back and say, well, yeah, I know that. You could see that coming. No, you couldn't. It reminds me of a story one time I was coaching a high school basketball game, and we were getting thrashed in the first quarter. And so I made this adjustment to the game plan. Long story short, we end up winning. So a parent comes up to me after the game and says, Chuck, how did you know how to do that so that you could end up winning? I said, I didn't know what I was doing. I said, we were getting killed. I had to do something. And it's kind of like town meeting back then. They didn't know if it was going to work, but they were faced with a situation and they had to do something. So they made the best choice they could at the time. So when you think about and you look at these town meeting notes from the 1700s, you don't know the end of the story. You have to study it that way. I don't know what happened. Pretend I don't know. What would I have decided at that point? Go ahead. So it changes the way you look at it. Keep going up. We can move. So just a little bit of 3 slides of a recap. In the 1600s, we're a Puritan colony. The Great and General Court of Massachusetts, which is still called the legislature today, was basically a group of Puritan stockholders in the Massachusetts Bay Colony Company. They're making all the decisions for what's going on. And they get to decide. They have a charter from the king, and they can grant land grants. So they're granting land grants out here. There's no Hopkinton, all right? That doesn't even exist yet. They're granting these large land grants to people as kind of as rewards. They may have done something, they may have not done something, they may have done some service for the king. Half these guys never came out here. They would be granted 40 acres, 50 acres, 30 acres, 200 acres. They didn't know where it was. And they ended up spinning it off. They would end up selling it to somebody and never having seen the land. This guy is Edward Hopkins. Now, a little irony about Edward Hopkins. Governor of Connecticut, successful merchant. We did that whole lecture on him last time, so I don't need to go there. But he goes back to England in 1650, 52 or 53. He goes back to England. He's very successful here. And he is part of the group that ends up beheading King Charles. He goes back to overthrow the monarchy. That's why he goes back. He is part of Cromwell's government. Very important point. He dies unexpectedly. And he leaves a will and a wife. And the wife lives 40 years longer than him. So nothing happens to that will until the late 1600s. This is actually a copy of his will. And in his will, he states that he's leaving a certain amount of money for the spreading of the word of his Lord Jesus Christ in the New England. Because that's where he was. He was in the New England. But nothing else. So here's a chunk of money. That's what's attached to it. Go ahead, Up. And what happens is Ann Hopkins dies 1698. Harvard hires a lawyer because if you're going to spread the word of Jesus Christ in the New England colonies, it would be a Congregationalist, and the only people who are really educating ministers are Harvard and Yale. So they get in a 10-year battle over the money. As normal, Harvard wins. Harvard gets the money. And then they come out, and I'm really being abbreviated here, all right? And Harvard comes out and buys what we know today as Hopkinton from the Nipmuc Indians that were here. Very controversial. It's not it's not a clean deal, but that's what happens. And their theory is that they will rent the land to tenant farmers for a penny a year for 100 years, and that money will serve to educate ministers at Harvard University. So that's their theory, all right? As we move forward, go ahead, Hopkinton's incorporated in 1715. But they don't, the other really funny thing, not funny, it's kind of weird. The governor's signing the incorporation papers, and he's going to create this town. And so he's trying to spell the word Magunko, and he can't spell it. He tries 4 or 5 different ways, and he gives up, and he says Hopkinton. So he wanted to name it after the indigenous people that were here, and he couldn't figure out how to spell the word. And so we end up with Hopkinton. All right? So what we did find out was that a bunch of people from Framingham, named down at the bottom, end up coming, again, you're moving further out into the wilderness. All right, Framingham was the wilderness. All I can think of is Shopper's World, and I can't think, how can that be the wilderness? All right, but they come out here, and so they come out and they start to establish a town. But the rules were you had to have a church to have a town, to be able to do everything that a town was supposed to do in a congregational colony. So, go ahead, on. May 21st, 1723, the town votes to have preaching constantly on the Sabbath, establishing a church, and hires 24-year-old Harvard-educated Samuel Barrett as the first minister. Barrett is ordained in that church, the horrible picture that Aubrey took, in that house. He was ordained, the first town meeting, and now Hopkinton is a town with all of the powers of a town. And they have it's very important to understand that Massachusetts Bay Colony, was a Puritan colony. It translates to our language would be congregational. And if you came to the last lecture, you understand how authority begins to break down with Martin Luther and the authority of the church. And so there's this egalitarian thing that's forming. The Puritans try to reform the Church of England. They strike out doing that. So they say, heck with it, we're going over here. And we're going for what I was taught was they came here for religious freedom. They did not come here for religious freedom. We interpret religious freedom as religious tolerance. They interpreted religious freedom as, I'm going to practice my religion and you're not. It's a very different thing when you read it that way and you think about it that way. So when Barrett becomes the minister of Hopkinton, then it is a congregational town, and it is expected that everybody will go to the congregational church. And they didn't call it a basilica, a cathedral, or a church. What did they call it? A meeting house. So all of these things begin to make sense as you understand the backdrop. So they decide to become a town. They're going to do all the things you have to do. Go ahead, Bob, we'll go to the next one. And the impact of the town early on. So Barrett is the congregational minister, 1724, and we actually pay our taxes to the minister, all right? And the minister kind of administers the town, but he is paid through municipal taxes. So the differentiation between church and state is not strong at this particular time. And I think it would be best to say it's fuzzy at best. Okay, go ahead. And this is actually the handwritten notes of Samuel Barrett, accepting, this day has God appointed me a pastor over the Church of Christ in Hopkinton. Samuel Barrett, September 20th, 1724. So these things, you know, it's not fake. This stuff happened on this soil in this town. These guys, as Brian so beautifully put it, they're living their daily lives. And yet things are happening around them. You know, they don't have water coming out of pipes in their walls. They got to go get it. All right? And they have to cut firewood to heat their homes. There's all this stuff where it was just harder to get through the regular day, but they're paying attention. They're paying attention to what's going on. Go ahead, on. And the other church impact is, and this starts to happen now. So the King of England, who is now George III, all right, he's starting to realize, I don't know what's going on over there, but we better start paying attention. And there's a lot of Congregationalists over there. So we need an outpost. We need to get the Church of England over there. Because all the ministers in the Church of England must swear loyalty to the King of England. Because he's also their Pope. So they've got to do that. So Roger Price comes to Boston. So he sets up, the king goes to, Boston is the hotbed. There's a reason we have Bruins fans, all right? Boston is just, they're crazy. The people in Boston are crazy, and they're leaning towards more rebellion than not, more so than any of the other 13 colonies. So the king says, we need an outpost in Boston. Go set up Church of England there. So guess what he sets up? He sets up a chapel. And what's it called? The King's Chapel. And it's in Boston. And you can go to that now. You can go visit it. It's there. So Price, what do we go to from this up? Can you show me the next one? Oh, yeah. So there's a bunch of people. So basically, the members of the Church of England were more affluent. They were more loyal. They were a little bit, snotty. But they are now coming out to Framingham. They're establishing a little Episcopal area in Framingham. And they bring Price out, because Price is the minister of King's Chapel in Boston. So they bring him out, and he writes, his favorite residence was in Hopkinton, in the beautiful tract of lands where he hoped to find fortune for his family, and where the gayer and more free-living members of his church made a summer colony to whom he preached and ministered in this little church. Roger Price, the representative of the Church of England in Boston, goes fishing in Hopkinton. And he decides he likes it here. And he wants to establish a church here, a Church of England. So he does. Go ahead, Ab. Go ahead. So you guys know where 1 Ash Street is, right? It's now owned by the BAA, Boston Athletic Association. So behind there, when you guys ever take a right and you're going down the hill, on the right-hand side, you see the tombs that are over there, right? The first 2 Church of England buildings were behind those tombs. And they faced what is today East Main Street. So they would be there, and then one building got deteriorated. They weren't that good at building. And then the second one also didn't do too well. And the third one, go ahead, Ob, can we fly that in? We only have this very grainy picture. And this third Church of England was built at 1 Ash Street, all right? And it was built in 1815, and then it became in disrepair at the end of the Civil War in 1865. So at the end of the Civil War, the Church of England, the parishioners don't have a place to go to church. So for like 25 years or something like that. Go ahead, up. But then they get the money to build on the right-hand side this fieldstone, beautiful church in the center of Hopkinton. And you know that church today because it has been incorporated into our public library. So the St. Paul's Episcopal Church was next to the public library, both of them built in the 1890s. And then lo and behold, in I think 2012, they were joined to become one library and one beautiful structure. And I've had the pleasure of speaking in that church a number of times. It's just a magnificent building. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. In 1960s, the Episcopal Church goes down to Wood Street and builds their church on Wood Street down near the DPW on the same side, if you guys ever go down that way. So think about this for a minute. From 1736 till now, the Episcopal Church has been in Hopkinton. Same congregation. So the Congregational Church, let's fly one in here up, see what we got. Okay, so you guys know where the Korean Congregational Church is across from the Common, all right? That is the third building on that site, all right? The original meeting house was on the town common, and it served both as the meeting house and the Congregational Church. Once they separated church and state, town hall got built. The Congregational Church built across the street at that location. I do not have a photo of that first Congregational Church. I have one somewhere, I think. But it burnt down in one of the fires in the 1880s. So when that burnt down, they built what to me is still the most beautiful architectural building we've ever had in Hopkinton, this church up on the right-hand side. It is a spectacular building if you see it in a much better photograph. And that church was built on the site where this church today stands. All right? That church, the tower came down in it was either the tornado of 53 or the hurricane, and that came down, and then they had to rebuild it again, and they built the white church on the same spot. And underneath the white church cornerstone, there is a time capsule that was put on the bottom there when they put that in. I have no idea what's in it. I don't know if anybody does. If you do, shut up. Don't say anything. All right? Make sure we dig it up later. Okay? And then, of course, the Congregational Church moved down East Main Street and renamed as Faith Community Church. And with Mike Lawrence there today, still exists. And they just celebrated in 2024 their 300th anniversary. So these two religious groups have been continuously practicing in this town since the beginning of the town. That blows my mind. All right? But it's also very cool. Okay, let's keep going on. So we want to talk a little bit about the town meeting notes that we actually read. We're covering the period. We're not doing justice to this. We only got an hour, man. You got to bear with us, all right? But 1725 to 1756. All right, so in the town meeting, these are some of the things. They choose a town clerk. They get constables. They elect other officers. They talk about roads. Oh, my God, all right? They have to pay. There's a big discussion about increasing the minister's salary. Like every year, they have to keep increasing the minister's salary. They provide a school. Then they decide they need more than one school. Sounds familiar, all right? And then they decide, let the pigs run free. So in a lot of ways, if you stop and think about it, well, let's keep going. Go ahead, Op. So some things never change, all right? I mean, just think about going to a town meeting. Or perhaps don't, but think about it, all right? What did they do? They accepted roads. They set up schools. They elected town officers. They paid debts. They built town facilities. This is what they did. This is the mundane stuff that Brian was talking about when regular people do regular things to keep a town going. But they also had some different things. Go ahead, up. The one thing that stuck out, we found this so this guy, Samuel Wark, in 1731, the town figures out that the state owes the town money. So they send this guy into Boston to go get the money that the state owes him. So he goes in, and while he's there, he buys a barrel of nails and brings it back out and reports to town meeting because they haven't built a meeting house yet, and they need a barrel of nails. And one of the hardest things to come across in the colonial period was anything metal, anything, nails, tools, saws, hammers, hoes, anything like that. So you go into Boston to buy your nails because there's nobody in Hopkinton making nails. And it's so odd for us to think about that, but is it really? We go to Lowe's and Home Depot. Is that different, Go ahead. So the school was held in several places in Hopkinton. And they were not schools. They would hire what they called back then a school marm, usually a young woman, who would agree to educate the local kids around whatever house she was near, and they would make for minimal literacy. They were really trying to teach literacy. But it wasn't like you went to school 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, or anything like that. It's like, let's come Tuesday. Okay. All right, they would meet in somebody's house. So it was irregular, but it was fulfilling what the province of Massachusetts was requiring them to do. So there already was an educational mandate coming down from the State House. And they also elected town officials. They elected a sealer of leather, somebody who would go out, and when you slaughtered your cow and made leather, they would grade the leather to see how much you could sell it for. They would have a clerk of the market. I haven't figured out what that is. A field driver would just go out and round up all the stray animals that got loose. And we actually have a pound. Have you guys ever seen the town pound going down the hill on the right? So they'd put them in there, and you come get your cow, your pig, your sheep, whatever, all right? And then they had a tithing guy. I didn't know what this was. But a tithing guy would go to church and discipline anybody who was misbehaving in church. And I thought, you had a guy for that? Like, what were they doing in there? That you had to have a disciplinarian in church. But that's what he was, all right? And the hogreave was somebody who would have to round up the hogs. And it turns out that because we let our hogs go free, we didn't really need a hogreave. So it became this joke at town that anybody who was going to be getting married the next year, they named him the hogreave for the town. And he had that title for the next year. We also changed borders, all right? We cut off a big slice that went to Upton. Some went to Holliston. Some went to Ashland. And there's some disagreement about exactly why and how that took place. Some people believe it's because it was too far for people to get to church, so they would start a new center, and they would be able to do that. Because you got to remember, if you lived way out on Spring Street, what is today Spring Street in Hopkinton, and the roads were mud and dirty, and you had to get to town for church, you kind of probably didn't make it a lot. All right, so they had to make it more convenient for that. One of the last three things are really kind of interesting. The persons in town, and this was throughout New England, they could warn you out of town. So you had to pass a test to get accepted. I said, what is this, like pledging a frat? You go in and they would say, no, this guy's going to be too much of a drain on our treasury. He's out. We're not accepting him. He's not coming. And you couldn't come. And I often wonder about those people. What do they do? Go to the next town? I mean, what do you do if you get rejected? Where do you go? They also were very severe in some of their punishments. There were public whippings on bare skin to set an example for people for thievery and things like that. It's hard for us to get our arms around what this must have been like, but it happened. And there was also significant slavery in Hopkinton. There were many families that had owned slaves, and even Samuel Barrett, the minister, had slaves. So there's a lot of mishmash. It's not a clear conceptual line that everybody followed. And it's hard for us to understand that it's more of a quilt than anything else, and we got to kind of figure out how it went together. Go ahead, Bob. But they also had tremendous compassion. And within the town, children whose parents were incapable of providing for them, who maybe had their own issues, were taken in by other families, and town meeting would vote taxes to support those kids every year. So this was in lieu of the social safety nets that we have out there today. It was a kind of a municipal social safety net, but it was arbitrarily decided at every town meeting. There was one woman, I remember that she was classified as mentally ill. For over 27 years, every year, the town voted money to that family to take care of her. And then there was another one where there was a family in need, and so the town bought a cow and lent it to the guy so that he could milk it and get food for his family and so on and so forth. And then taxes were routinely abated for people that just couldn't afford their taxes. So we have, on one hand, slavery and whipping and this other stuff. On the other hand, we have these tremendous acts of compassion, all from the same community. Go ahead. Switching gears. We were down at Hopkinton. We're going back out big picture for a minute, okay? Salutary neglect. It is the unofficial policy of Britain from 1650 to 1750, where they basically neglected the colonies. They paid no attention to them. All right, as long as they sent them a little money now and then, they were busy with other stuff. A king had been beheaded. They had other issues they were dealing with. They didn't really deal with this very much. And salutary neglect is a very big, important thing when we start to understand why we ended up revolting from the mother country. Because while they were doing this, let me back up a step. Let's say it's 1775, the year of Lexington and Concord. If you were a citizen of Massachusetts, you could be a fifth-generation colonist. Now let that sink in for a minute. Your great-great-grandfather could have been, and your whole family history has been in the British American colonies, not in England. But you have always considered yourself a citizen of the British Empire, with all the rights and privileges that go along with being a British citizen. But you're here. But during this period of salutary neglect, they developed their own governments. All 13 of these colonies have legislatures. They all are governing. And more importantly, their businesses it's hands off. They were developing their own businesses, their own trades. They're trading with the Caribbean. They're trading with Spain. And they have these relationships. And they've got stuff going, and they're making money. So that's the setting of salutary neglect that you have to keep in the back of your mind. Go ahead, up. The Ohio Territory. Can we pull that third map up? All right, so if you guys can see here, you guys recognize this. Prior to the French and Indian War, these are the 13 colonies, the British colonies. Yellow is Spain, blue is France. Striped line, up for grabs. All right, the Ohio Territory. To give you a sense of what's going on, in 1750, the population of the 13 British colonies is 1 million people. Look at the size of it. The population of all the land that France owns is 50,000. So there's a great discrepancy here. The French and Indian War is, I forget what it is, 1756 or something to 63. But you have to understand there were 3 French and Indian Wars before that. All right? Queen Anne War, King William War, King George's War, and then what we came to call the French and Indian War. What people don't understand is the conflict with indigenous populations never stopped. And it was never clear-cut. Tribes were not clear-cut. Sub-tribes were not clear-cut. The 6 nations of the Iroquois, all these different, and they all made their deals. They knew what was going on. They made their deals, many of them with the French, because the French treated them better than the British. So they were allied with the French, and the British were starting to get wind of this, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. This here is a very important point. It is everything in the land at this point revolved around water transportation, rivers. All right, you couldn't get stuff over land, so it was all on putting it on water. So the Mississippi, the Ohio, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, those are all really important rivers at this time. Go ahead up. So again, there's not a British, the redcoats aren't here yet. Okay, they're here, but just scattered around. Virginia and Pennsylvania want the Ohio Territory. They're dying to get there because it's great farmland, and they know it. And the boundary that I showed you, the western edge of the British colonies, is the Appalachian Mountains. So they want to get out there and get going. So 1749, George II grants 200,000 acres to a group of Virginia plantation owners, and he calls it the Ohio Company. And he says, you can go out there and that land's yours. The king says to these plantation owners, and if you settle there, I'll give you another 300,000. So there's 500,000 acres of farmland waiting for him out there. So the Virginia Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie, he says to the Virginia militia, hey, we know the French are coming down the Hudson River, Lake Champlain, Lake George, for those of you who know geography, and they're coming down all the way down that east coast, and they're also setting up at the Three Rivers, Fort Duquesne, the French fort there. So Dinwiddie says to his militia, and the militia's a little shaky, all right? They're not the greatest fighters. They're just guys. All right? And they say, you guys want to come? Yeah, we'll go. Okay, so they go. And so they go out to Fort Duquesne, and he says, try to have a diplomatic mission and tell the French to get out. So this young guy goes out there leading these 200 militiamen, and he says, hey, would you guys get out? And they said, no, we're not going anywhere. Get out of here. So they send him home. So then the king starts to realize, okay, there's something going on here. So the king gives the Virginia militia permission to go up there and use force. If you have to move them out, go up and use force. So now they send 900 militia from Virginia. And they head up, I think it's a 500-mile trip up to Fort Duquesne. And they end up in a skirmish. And it's a long story, but these are not just militia against French. It's militia and indigenous people against French and indigenous people. It complicates things. And they kill one of the French commanders, supposedly by accident. The French are furious. They send down the whole shooting match, and they just destroy the militia. But there's like 300 of them that are remaining, and the French do kind of a gentlemanly thing, and they allow them to surrender and march back to Virginia with their dignity. And so they do. They go back. But now the word gets back to the king that the French aren't messing around. The French are taking the Ohio Valley. And the king says, okay, here's what we're going to do. You guys, you colonies, you get together and you figure out how you're going to work together, and you've got to get the Iroquois back on our side. You got to get them, because we're not beating the French in their indigenous piece unless we have our own. So they call, probably the most undertaught piece of American history, they call the Albany Congress in Albany, New York, which was the most inland city at that time in the 13 colonies. And only 8 colonies accept, and 150 Iroquois. So they all come together in Albany. And they start saying, how are we going to do this? And there's one guy there from Pennsylvania named Benjamin Franklin. And Franklin comes up with a plan. It's called the Albany Plan. And he says, look, if we're going to make this work, we got to come together. And the only way we're going to come together is if we write a document that says this is what we're going to do. And we'll have a parliament, what he called the legislature, that will be elected by the 13 colonies. And then we'll have the King of England appoint a president general. And so we'll have a bipartisan government that can then get us started so that we can take the French. And he writes this magnificent plan up, and he sends it to all 13 colonies, and all 13 colonies say, hell no. We're not giving up our self-government. We're not. Massachusetts and South Carolina, not going to work. So it fails. And Franklin does this little cartoon here that shows a snake cut up into parts and says, join or die. Franklin owns a paper called the Philadelphia Gazette. And he published this cartoon in the Philadelphia Gazette. And the Albany Plan and the Albany Congress is important because it's the first time that these 13 disparate colonies started to think about working together and came up with actually a plan of unification. Rejected, but a plan of unification. That Albany Congress would become the blueprint for the First Continental Congress. Okay, go ahead up. The thing we were not taught, I was not taught, maybe you were, if you had Brian, you were probably taught. The French and Indian War is what we called it. The Europeans called it the 7 Years' War. And the French and Indian War was just the North American theater of the 7 Years' War. So the two empires, the two Western European empires, France and England, are doing battle. So they are, just so you know, they're fighting in Europe, they're fighting in India, they're fighting in the Philippines, they're fighting in the Caribbean, and now they're fighting in North America. Winston Churchill, many, many years later, would call this the First World War. And he said, we didn't understand what the French were up against when we kept saying, would you send some guys over? They got people going everywhere. All right, so it's a big deal for them. Go ahead, Hop. So Massachusetts, Hopkinton, what do they do during the French and Indian War? It turns out that 1/3 of the eligible men in Massachusetts end up serving in the French and Indian War. They don't serve long. It's like a 6-year war, 7-year war. They go in for 4 or 5 months at a time. So they're rotating in, coming home. Next guy rotating in, coming home. And all the commanders would say, these guys are terrible. I can't train them. I get them to do one thing and they leave. They go home. All right? But in the end, the British have sent now thousands of soldiers, redcoats, well-drilled military people here. And the militia from the 13 colonies really serve in support of that army. That army does most of the fighting. The militias end up building the forts, bringing the supplies, clearing the roads, and on occasion entering the battles. They're farmers with rifles. They are not the redcoats. What's really interesting about this is the first commander is General Braddock from Britain. And part of the, let me just tell you briefly. No, I can't. It'll take too long. I'll go real quick. Massachusetts, I kept trying to figure out, how'd they get guys to go? Governor Shirley, Massachusetts, Governor Shirley was the key to the whole game. He ends up being the commander of all the British forces after Braddock is killed in battle. He convinces Parliament to give us a ton of money to pay our militia. Our militia are making more money going into the militia than they could possibly make by staying home. So there's a financial incentive, because you got to remember, if you're a colonial family, you have a lot of kids, but only the oldest son gets to inherit the farm. So the other sons are like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'll shoe horses or something, right? So they would go. They would oftentimes be the ones who would go to the militia because they could make a decent amount of money and then come back. But there's this rotation, and it's a ragtag group, all right? But one guy from Virginia who was part of that original Virginia militia that got their tail kicked. He ends up being a consultant to Braddock, and he leads the British guys up there as a scout and takes them up into Fort Duquesne, which is today Pittsburgh. All right, the Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, the Ohio, the Allegheny, and the Monongahela. Now you know why it's Three Rivers. All right, he leads them up there, and he comes back after the French and Indian War, and he writes this manifesto of everything he learned from the British commanders. How they wrote orders, how they gave orders, where did they get their supplies, how did they do battle things. He's learned this entire thing that he didn't know when he was a kid and went up there and got his tail kicked by the French. Go ahead. So, 1763 is the Treaty of Paris, which ends the French and Indian War. This is what Britain has before the war. This is what they have after the war. France gives all this up. Spain gives up Florida. Spain gives up a good part of other, and they end up with Cuba, and France ends up with some of the Caribbean islands, which still today, you go down and you see the French influence, etc. And this is where it all begins. The problem is this is too much land for the British to rule. They have no idea what they're going to do with this. Remember, the 7-Year War, all those fronts that they're fighting battles on. This is the least thing they want to do. Go ahead, Rob. So this young guy who had gone up and gotten his butt kicked with the Virginia militia and goes back as a consultant and writes down everything he learned from the British commanders. And he publishes this book about everything he learned that gets published in the colonies and in London, and he becomes pretty well known. Go ahead, Rob. And his name is George Washington. George Washington learns how to become a military commander from the British officers that he will go up against 12 years later. And that manifesto, if you will, it's just an amazing turn of events when you think about it. He's a very ambitious guy. Washington was a very ambitious guy. When he came back after the French and Indian War, he was so angry that the British officers mistreated and looked down upon the militia. He was so angry about that. He rode from Virginia to Boston on horseback to meet with Governor Shirley and say, you've got to make me an officer in the British Army. And Shirley says no. And he has to go back. Go ahead up. The other thing that we found from our town meeting notes, which was absolutely amazing. You guys, is anybody old enough to have read Evangeline in school? You know, the poem of the eradication of the Catholic Acadians. So Acadia was part of France. It's north of Maine, goes all the way up, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, up that way. And when the British took it over, the British controlled it for a long time. When they took it over, they left these poor farming peasants, the Acadians, there, and nobody thought there was going to be any trouble, so they said, okay, and the British tolerated them there. But in the middle of the French and Indian War, the British referred to them as papists, meaning they were followers of the Pope, and they would not swear allegiance to the King of England. So they said, we have to deport them. We've got to get them out of here. Sound familiar? And so they pack them up, and they send them down to the 13 colonies, and most importantly, they send them all the way down to Louisiana and to New Orleans, where the French influence is still there today, from the Cajuns and from the Acadians who came down. There's a story behind everything, if you can kind of figure it out. But what we found interesting, go ahead, Op, is in our town meeting notes from August 26, 1760, in obedience to the order of the commander of the General Court, Selectmen of Sherburne, Holliston, and Hopkinton this day met at Holliston in order to make a division of families French neutrals. That's what they called the Acadians. And these people at the bottom, Amabel Dugas, Elizabeth Dugas, Margaret Godis, and John was attested to, those were the Acadians who were assigned to Hopkinton. So some of those people were displaced to the town of Hopkinton. It's not dead history, it's alive history. These people then had families here and had descendants here. Go ahead. And at the bottom, it just said that they would make support, that the town would support the French neutrals who ended up here. Again, an act of compassion. I'm going to step aside for 1 second because as we now go into the next stage of town meetings and town meeting notes, it's really critical that we understand the role of the Enlightenment and the ideas of the Enlightenment, which were taking place in Europe. For those of you who remember, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Montesquieu, Rousseau, all right, those are the great philosophers of that time. But the one that was most significantly affecting the American ideology was John Locke. John Locke was not famous during his lifetime. In fact, he was kind of ignored. But after he died, his ideas surfaced again. And these are the important things. John Locke said, human beings, now you've got to remember, you guys have all read about the divine right of kings, where God gives a king, it's a hierarchy, you're born into a caste, you do what you're told, that's where you are for life, amen. See you later, all right? John Locke says, no, human beings are born with with inalienable individual rights, and that they enter into a social contract with whomever they agree will govern them. And they say, we will give up some of our individual rights in exchange for protection and order. And if you violate our rights, we have a right to overthrow you. It is the direct line to the Declaration of Independence. The direct line. And we know that Jefferson studied at the University of Virginia under a professor who taught him specifically Locke. And he was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. So it's very important to understand that the ideas behind the American Revolution, and then a few years later the French Revolution, they didn't come out of thin air. These had been percolating for quite some time. So the 7 Years' War is over. All right? Britain recognizes, remember that thing about salutary neglect? They recognize that, it's like letting a teenager raise themselves. You know, they're not coming back. All right? They're governing themselves. They have their own business things. And you're walking in and say, all right, I'm going to lay down the law. It's essentially what happened. British debt is it's actually 60 million pounds. Now, this was not silver and gold that they had. They did exactly what we're talking about today. They sold notes with interest that was due. And they had to go get this money. And guess who was ripe for the picking? The colonies. So the Crown also makes a huge mistake. You remember the map with the disputed territory, and the colonists were fighting because Pennsylvania, Virginia, they wanted to get in there and farm. The king says, you can't go there to the colonies. We are reserving that for the indigenous people that live there. Oh, colonists go cuckoo. They lost sons in fighting for this. And then the king unilaterally says, no, not going to do it. Go ahead. So the burden of taxation now falls to the colonies. The king is looking to get paid. And the king looks at it and says, hey, look, we bailed you out, man. You were going to get killed by the French. You owe us. But remember from the time of the Magna Carta, British citizens believed that they had the right to representation. They had a right to a trial by jury of their peers. They had these things as British citizens. And when you read some of the things we're going to show you, you're going to see what happens in Hopkinton, little old wilderness Hopkinton. In 1764, they passed the Sugar Act. In 1765, they passed the Stamp Act. Kath, do you have that stuff that we can pass out real quickly? I'm going to apologize for 2 minutes, but we're going to give you something that we want you to have in your hands. It is, I will tell you what it is. I don't remember the date. It's October 1765. Think about this, guys. October 1765. Hopkinton Town Meeting appoints a committee, and that committee is instructed to give what we would call our state representative, to give the state rep instructions to take to the General Court of Massachusetts in reaction to the Stamp Act. They said the representative, one of the really big guys in Hopkinton history, his name is John Jones. And they write a letter to John Jones. And they say, you go to the General Court and you relay what the people of Hopkinton, what their reaction is to the Stamp Act. John, can I grab one of those? Because I actually don't have a copy. Thank you. I think when Aubrey and John and I were reviewing this, the thing that struck us about this letter was the eloquence, the language. And at first I thought, oh, he was just copying the Declaration of Independence. But then I said, wait a minute, that wasn't written for another 11 years. These guys, these subcommittee from Hopkinton wrote this. And if you look at some of the underlined stuff, and unconstitutional taxes, when we are deprived of what we have ever esteemed our unalienable, sound familiar, invaluable, and most distinguishing rights as British subjects. It is a magnificent document. I encourage you to take it home and to look at it, because this is not the Declaration of Independence. This is the town of Hopkinton's instructions and their reaction to the Stamp Act and their reaction to the king saying you cannot have a trial by jury. So in 1765, 2 years after the end of the French and Indian War, the king is trying to tax Hopkinton so much so that they're lighting a little fire here. If you go on and you read, they also say towards the end of it, but we are still loyal British subjects of your majesty, and we wish to be British citizens, and if you give us the right to vote, we will be better citizens. They are not revolutionaries. They are not. This is the actual letter, by the way, that's up on the screen. You see why we use AI, right? This is the actual letter of what they wrote and sent to the General Court of Massachusetts. Go ahead, Bob. Keep going. So we have the Sugar Act, we have the Stamp Act, we have the Quartering Act, all right? The Quartering Act was when the king said, we're sending, you guys are getting out of control. You Bostonians, you Bruins fans, you're getting out of control. We're sending in the army to Boston, and you have to house them. You've got to build housing for them. You've got to feed them, and you've got to take care of them. You can imagine what that did to the colonists. Think about a military moving into a sensitive area and confronting the population. It's only a matter of time before something does not go according to plan. Go ahead. The Townsend Acts, I'm not going into those, there's so many of them, but it was, again, further instructions about, you're going to pay taxes on this, you're going to pay taxes on this, you're going to pay taxes on this. Go ahead. Hopkinton, in the November 27, 1767, writes a town meeting that basically says, we're boycotting. We're boycotting all these things that you guys are taxing us on, and we're going to try to make as much of it ourselves as we can. Massachusetts is a pain in the ass to the king. All right? The other colonies aren't quite as far along, but you have Sam Adams, John Adams, Paul Revere. You got all these guys in Boston, and they're like not taking this sitting down. They would have been great Bruins fans. All right? Go ahead. Keep going up. So these are the ones that we already have. This is what we know about. Go ahead. And then there's a confrontation in Boston. Young guys. Now, the British soldiers were young guys, averaging 19 to 24 years old. The young guys roaming around Boston. And you can imagine the, Bruins fans and Canadian fans. You can imagine that, right? And so somebody hits one of the soldiers with a snowball. And then tempers flare and shots ring out and 5 people get killed. The first time British soldiers kill British citizens or people who considered themselves British citizens in the British American colonies. Go ahead on. The Boston Massacre, by the way, was witnessed by a person we will come back to from Hopkinton. He was there, he saw it, he didn't forget it. Go ahead. The other thing you have to remember is that Hopkinton, was on one of the 2 major routes between Boston, Hartford, New York, Old Connecticut Path, as we sometimes call it. There was also the Boston Post Road. And no one knows for sure exactly, but they almost always followed the original indigenous people's paths, and they were widened and they were made better and so on and so forth. So what we can't get our arms around is who came through. When Washington left Virginia to come to visit Governor Shirley, did Washington ride through Hopkinton? I don't know. Right? Nobody does. Anybody tells you they know, they're lying. All right? Go ahead. Keep going up. So these are the ones we know about. Then the Tea Act comes in. Tea was the most common drink in the colonies at that point. And basically, again, you're talking 60 million pounds that England is in debt. And the East India Trading Company was in trouble. So basically, England gave them a monopoly on tea and said, they're going to bring all their tea over and we're going to tax it and we're getting the taxes back. All right? The colonists had been smuggling tea in for over 100 years. They had their suppliers. They knew who they were going to get. They didn't pay any taxes. It was straight commerce, baby. Capitalism at its best. And now, the king steps in and says, you got to buy your tea here. I think you've heard of the Boston Tea Party. All right? There's a lot that I didn't know about the Boston Tea Party. Probably a lot I still don't know. But if we can go to the next slide. Go ahead. Go ahead. John Dickman. John Dickman lived kind of at the corner of Fruit Street and North Street in Woodville. In my opinion, he was clearly a member of the Sons of Liberty. He would cart ammunition back out and and he was the one who witnessed the Boston Massacre, and he was one of the participants in the Boston Tea Party. But what I didn't know was that every participant in the Boston Tea Party swore never to reveal anybody else's identity until they died. So no one knew Dickman was part of the Boston Tea Party until after he died. He also was part of the Battle of Bunker Hill. He smuggled arms out to Hopkinton. He participated in the Battle of Dorchester Heights, which eventually drove the British from Boston. He fought in Rhode Island against the British. And he is buried in Woodville at Evergreen Cemetery. So if you want a direct connection to the precursor to the American Revolution, and by the way, I think if you can keep in your mind the notion that it really was the French and Indian War that drove us to the American Revolution. At the Boston Tea Party, Ben Franklin wrote that he felt it was wrong for them to throw the tea in the harbor. Ben Franklin. He said, it's right to not pay the taxes, but we shouldn't be destroying property. That's not the right way. After the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty, and have you guys heard of the Committees of Correspondence? They were kind of the underground network. They were the I don't know. They just knew everything. They were very, very good infiltrators. At first it was only Boston, then it was New York, then it was Philadelphia. And so all the subterranean communication that had to take place took place through the Committees of Correspondence. So the Committees of Correspondence hired this guy right after the Boston Tea Party, because I don't know if you knew, I didn't know, that there were 3 other ships filled with tea, one going to New York, one going to Philadelphia, one going to Charleston. And they said, you got to get your butt to New York and tell them what we did at the Boston Tea Party and tell them they can't take the tea. So this guy jumps on his horse, rides 5 straight days to New York, gives them all the information, turns around and rides 5 days back. And his name is Paul Revere. And I never knew that Paul Revere was like the first one-man Pony Express. He not only went down and did this, but he did it for the First Continental Congress. He goes to New York, then he goes to Philadelphia, then he rides back. And he goes again at the Second Continental Congress. I just thought he knew about silver. And even if you read the literature from Paul Revere's house, they say, we have no idea how he became such a horseman. The guy lived in the city. He walked everywhere. So how did this happen? It's just one of those things where you scratch your head and say, man, there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know about what happened. Go ahead. So in the Hopkinton town meetings of 1774, evidently the state government wanted to know who the Tories were, who the Loyalists were. And they told the constables of Hopkinton that you've got to send us a list of who these people were. And the constables refused to do it. And then town meeting voted to indemnify the constables. We're with you. We're behind you. You must understand there were very many Tories in Boston. This was not a slam dunk. There were a lot of people who still considered themselves members of the British Empire. And they wanted to remain that way. And in fact, we could do a whole series on who they were in Hopkinton, how they lived. And there was an element of mutual respect, but disagreement between them. It would eventually come to a head where the Tories had to leave town. But during the early parts, they're still coexisting. They're now voting to buy stock and ammo. All right, that kind of appeared newly and repetitively during this time period. The Committee of Correspondence to regulate the town in case of an alarm, to join the selectmen that there shall be no rising of an army without the consent of the major part of them. There's not going to be a bunch of hotheads that go. But if we decide as a town, then we're going. And there was a big meeting that I don't know much about. John was just reading about it and finding out about it in Concord, which basically set up an alternative government to Massachusetts Bay Colony, and we sent some representatives from our town meeting to that Concord meeting. So, there's this like momentum that's starting to build, but nobody's pulling the trigger. No, I didn't mean that. But nobody's taken that last step yet. Go ahead. January 9th, 1775. Remember, Lexington and Concord is April 19th, 1775. January 9th. They voted £6, 14 shilling. They need more stock. They need more ammo. They choose a committee to take care of the collections for the sufferers in Boston. The only thing we can think of on this is that Boston was boycotted and people were really, they were in harm's way there. And Hopkinton somehow must have voted some money to support them and get it in there. And then on February 13th, whereas the military in this town is in a broken situation, to see what measures the town will think proper to adopt for the reviewing and regulating of the same. They didn't feel prepared. They were like, yeah, if something happens, we're not ready. And we gotta start to think about getting ready. So each one of these is like a little baby step forward. They're all, but again, nobody knows the outcome. I will tell you one thing. They do not want to mess with the Redcoats. They followed the Redcoats into battle in the French and Indian War. They knew how good they were, and they knew who they were. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. On February 20th, they voted to have 3 companies in town. It's a big step. They choose Roger Dent, captain of the East Company, John Holmes, captain of the West Company, John Jones, captain of the Alarm Company. And then they voted that every man could choose the company he wished to serve in. It's getting serious. All right, things have started. Because you have to decide if your 3 sons in their 20s are going to become part of this. They're not trained military men. And in fact, you only have 1 gun for 3 sons. Go ahead. April 17th, they voted to have a company of Minutemen in the town. They voted to enlist 40 men for this company. They voted that each man have $1 at their enlistment. This is 2 days before Lexington and Concord. And we know that some of them went to Lexington and Concord. We don't know if they were engaged in battle directly, but we know that they went. Go ahead. And then, of course, we have the shot heard around the world. The British find out that the colonists are storing ammunition in large quantities in Concord, and they say, we're going to go get it. And guess who they call on? Paul Revere. Get your ass out there and tell them what's going on. He gets on his horse, Samuel Dawes, and they go. And if it weren't for that, they wouldn't have been prepared for what was going to take place. And it was a battle. Immediately after Lexington and Concord, most people say that was the beginning of the American Revolution, but war hadn't really been declared yet, but boy, it was happening. Hopkinton voted to provide blankets to furnish the men. They voted to choose a selectman to see if any gentleman would be as good to give something to those soldiers that are enlisted to help them down to the army, to help them get there. The sufficiency out there is not enough and made out by subscription. They had to draft people to get enough people to get into the army. And then they would furnish soldiers in this town now enlisted under Mellon with guns. It's now a publicly funded militia. Later on, they would provide guns, and you as an enlisted man would have a certain amount taken out of your pay to pay back for the guns. So you would essentially own the gun in a short period of time. Go ahead up. May 1775. Is there still a question at this point where the citizens of Hopkinton would say, maybe not. Maybe not. Look at who we're looking at. The largest empire in the world. What was the expression? The sun never sets on the British Empire. We're going to take these guys on? We don't even have a united government yet. We are 13 stubborn individual colonies. Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead. So we ask ourselves here today as we look at what happened from 1715 to 1775, why are we doing this? What is this all about? What is this going to do for us? Are we being good ancestors? Is your narrative going to be changed a little bit after today? And if so, how? What difference does it make to you? What do you know now that might say, I might think about that differently? Or what does it make you say, I want to know more about that? I don't study history for history. I don't. It's kind of fun, kind of cute, but you know. Oh, I got to thank my wife for a second, Kathy. I had to do this. I forgot about this up front. So I'm like a yellow lab, you know, like I'm doing all this research, and I'll come to the table and say, Kat, you know what I found out today? And, you know, I say something stupid. And she looks at me and she nods and she goes, oh, that's great. And I know she's rolling her eyes in her head. You know, I know she's like, oh my God, not again, right? But the fact that she pretended that she was interested was great. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. Are we being good ancestors? Will you be a good ancestor? As we look at the current events around us, so many of them have themes that are related to this. They're definitely related. And everybody's going to develop their own opinions about it. But are you going to be a good ancestor? We do this because this is what we do. Our whole point in Aubrey and John and myself in putting this all together was to be able to get to you and say, I hope you feel more connected to your town. I hope you feel like when you walk around downtown, you're walking on earth that you say, I know what happened here. And I'm not the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm just living in my little time period and doing what I do. So I hope it was worthwhile. I really thank you guys for coming out tonight.